it's very clear that we have here a Judean city built in the time of King David, destroyed after 20 or 30 years, probably by the Philistines. And because of this destruction, everything has been frozen, and we have a biblical Pompeii.
Beneath the sun-baked hills of Israel, where legend says a shepherd killed a giant, the ground has begun to speak.
He just bent over and he picked up 5 smooth stones. And these he put in his pouch. And he picked up his sling and he walked towards Goliath. And Goliath sees him and he goes, "What?"
For centuries, scholars called King David a myth, a name carved from faith, not fact. But when Dr. Yosef Garfinkel's team unearthed stone walls, twin gates, and inscriptions older than empires, the story of ancient Israel was rewritten.
They have uncovered remnants of King David's palace, underground passageways, and artifacts that bring biblical history to life.
After a lifetime spent chasing truth through dust and doubt, he's finally ready to tell the world what he found and why it changes everything. How Yosef Garfinkel discovered the lost city hidden in Israel's hills. Yosef Garfinkel's story doesn't begin with fame or discovery. It begins with a kid wandering the fields of Israel, surrounded by stones that carry thousands of years of history. Most children would walk past them without a thought, but he didn't. Those hills caught his imagination early, and they never let go. When he grew up, he chose to stay close to those ancient ridges, turning his childhood curiosity into a lifelong career. He became a field archaeologist. Later, he joined the Hebrew University of Jerusalem as a professor. But no matter how far his work took him, he always came back to one thing: the Iron Age, the time when small farming villages turned into real cities with walls, streets, and order. What drew him in were the real places that people built, towns that once stood tall but had since been swallowed by dirt and time. And one day, he found one of those places on a quiet ridge above the valley of Elah. The Valley of Elah is a wide, open stretch of farmland dotted with olive trees and scrub. It's peaceful today, but its name carries weight. It's said to be the site of the battle between David and Goliath. But Garfinkel wasn't there for legends. He was there because the land itself was impressive. From the ridge, you can see for miles in every direction. To the west lies the coastal plain, and to the east, the highlands rise toward Jerusalem. That spot had a modern name, Kirbet Keiafa. When Garfinkel and his co-director, Sar Ganor from the Israel Antiquities Authority, first walked across it in the late 2000s, they saw something that made them stop. Beneath the weeds, the outline of old stone walls traced faint lines in the earth. Some sections were big, thick enough that no farmer would have built them for fun. There was a flat area that looked like the remains of a gate, and the shape of a circular wall around the hill. A wall meant someone had a plan. A gate meant someone had authority. And together, they meant there was a story buried there worth finding. In the summer of 2007, the digging began. The team set up camp, marked the hill with square grids, and started peeling back the layers of soil. They scraped, brushed, measured, and recorded, one trowel stroke at a time. By the end of the first season, their patience had paid off. Beneath the dirt, they found the remains of a heavy city wall, one well-preserved gate, and rows of houses built right up against that wall. This wasn't a random village that grew over time. It was a planned city. Over the next few years, the shape of the town became clearer. Kirbet Keiafa wasn't huge, but it wasn't small either. It covered about 2.3 hectares, roughly 5.5 acres, enclosed by a solid wall that ran for about 2,300 feet around the hill. That wall was special. It wasn't just a pile of stones. It was what archaeologists call a casemate wall, made of 2 parallel lines of stone with small rooms in between. Those rooms added strength and could be used for storage or even living space. You don't build something like that by accident. You build it because you have the manpower, the know-how, and the reason to defend it. Some of those wall stones weighed several tons, the kind that take planning, teamwork, and muscle to move. Inside the wall, the team found houses that opened onto narrow streets circling the city. The pattern was clean and deliberate. Each home was fitted into the curve of the wall, forming a kind of inner ring of life. The same design appears in other ancient towns, which meant whoever built Keiafa was following a plan, not experimenting. Then they uncovered the gate, and that's when things got interesting. It wasn't a small doorway or a gap in the wall. It was a 4-chambered city gate, about 35 feet wide and 42 feet deep. The passage was long enough to control who came and went, almost like a checkpoint. You could imagine guards leaning in the shade, travelers waiting to enter, and merchants unloading their goods. Soon after, the team found something even more surprising: a second gate on the opposite side of the city, built exactly the same way. Two massive gates in a town this size were unheard of in the region. Gates were expensive and difficult to build, and most cities had only one. The discovery gave Caiapha a nickname that would stick: the City of Two Gates. As the seasons went on, the picture filled in. By the fifth excavation season, about 1/5 of the city had been uncovered. That included around 650 feet of the wall, both gates, a long building with stone pillars that some believed was a stable, and about 10 houses. For a place that had been buried for 3,000 years, that was a remarkable comeback. Open spaces near each gate form plazas where people once gathered. Everything fits together neatly, efficient, defendable, and planned. In those plazas, the team found the traces of daily life. There were grinding stones used to crush grain into flour, large jars that once held olive oil or wheat, and cooking pots blackened by fire. Then came one of the most talked about finds: a broken piece of pottery covered in ink writing, known as an ostracon. It was discovered near one of the gates, and even though the text was faded, it was clear that the person who wrote it knew how to form real words. Long inscriptions from this period are rare, and finding one at Caiapha meant the city wasn't just a military post. It was a place where people could read and write. By the later excavation seasons, the site had taken on real shape. The team mapped every wall and doorway, tracing how each house connected to the streets and how both gates anchored the city. They used drones, surveying equipment, and thousands of photos to record everything down to the smallest layer of soil. When the data came together, it showed something remarkable. The city seemed to have been built all at once, not gradually. It looked like a place designed and constructed in a single push, possibly to control this part of the valley. That made it unique among early Iron Age sites. By 2013, after 7 full excavation seasons, the team had documented every inch they could, but the meaning behind those discoveries was just starting to surface. Decoding the life and beliefs of Caiapha. The lines on the ostracon discovered at Khirbet Caiapha were arranged in 5 neat rows, each one divided by a faint painted stroke. The letters looked angular, the kind of shape scholars call an early alphabetic style, often nicknamed Proto-Canaanite. That name simply means it belongs to the family of alphabets that would later develop into Hebrew and other West Semitic scripts. The question everyone asks, of course, is what the writing means. And here's the honest truth: scholars don't all agree. The letters are real, but the reading is tricky. Some strokes are broken or faint, and several signs could be taken in more than one way. Over the years, different specialists have offered their own careful attempts. One well-known interpretation comes from Israeli scholar Gershon Galil, who identified words that read like a call for fairness, terms such as judge, widow, and orphan. It's a touching interpretation, but it's still just one proposal among several, built on partial letters and reasoned guesses where the pottery is damaged. Another well-known expert, Emil Puech, read the same inscription differently. He saw some of the same letter strings, but arranged them into other words. In his version, the writing talks about authority and protection, maybe even the appointment of a king. When two skilled scholars can look at the same few lines and end up in different places, that tells you how incomplete the evidence is. And this wasn't the only sign of writing from Caiapha. Years later, another inscription surfaced. A big clay storage jar stamped with the name, Eshbal, son of Beta. The name sounds dramatic because an Eshbal appears in the Bible, but the dig team made it clear this is just another man with the same name, not the same person. In the early 10th century BCE, Eshbal was a perfectly normal name. The word Baal in it was common across the region and didn't automatically point to a specific god or belief system. The importance of the jar isn't who the man was, it's that his name was written down. Names on storage jars are accounting. They tell you that people were marking ownership, tracking supplies, and keeping records of what belonged to whom. This was how communities managed food, oil, or grain. If a jar big enough to hold dozens of gallons of produce carried someone's name, that meant someone at the site could write well enough to label it. Khirbet Caiapha was a literate, functioning town. Dating the city was just as important as reading its words, and the team took that job seriously. Rather than guessing from pottery style alone, they used radiocarbon dating on burned olive pits collected from the city's destruction layer. Those small seeds were chosen because they're short-lived samples. They record only the year the fruit grew, not the age of old wood that might have burned later. This way, there's no confusion about older material making the site seem ancient when it's not. To keep the process fair, Garfinkel and his team divided some of the seeds and sent halves to two separate laboratories: the Accelerator Unit at Oxford University and the 14 Chronolab at Queen's University, Belfast. That way, each lab tested identical material, and any difference in results could be checked independently. The outcome was clear. Both labs' results clustered around the same period, roughly the late 11th to early 10th century BCE, about 3,000 years ago. To narrow that down even further, the team used a method called Bayesian modeling. The name sounds intimidating, but the idea is straightforward. Each carbon date comes with an error range of a few decades. By combining all those dates with what the archaeologists already know about which layers came first and which came later, the model tightens the overall timeline. In everyday terms, it's like averaging everyone's opinion, but weighting the ones that fit the physical evidence better. When they applied this to the Kayafa samples, the window landed firmly in the early 10th century BCE. This dating work also helped explain something unusual about the site. Unlike many ancient tells, which have long sequences of rebuilding one on top of another, Kayafa is mostly a one-period city. It sits directly on bedrock and shows only one major phase of construction and occupation before being abandoned. That makes it easier to read. In the second round of dating, the team didn't stop at a few samples. They ran 17 separate measurements on 11 different seeds, even splitting 4 of them again so each lab could check the same material. The final averages, once calibrated to calendar years, pointed consistently to around 1020 to 980 BCE. So the writing and the dating were in place. That left the question of belief. What did people worship here? The answer came from the buildings themselves. At Kayafa, archaeologists uncovered 3 special rooms that stood out from the rest. They were not large temples, but small focused spaces built into ordinary structures. Inside these rooms, they found the kind of objects that mark sacred use: upright standing stones, low stone altars, and carved architectural models that look like miniatures of real buildings. These were rooms for rituals, places where offerings were poured or prayers were made. One of those rooms produced a particularly striking object, a carved stone model shaped like a tiny shrine. It's about 8 inches high, 10 inches wide, and just under 14 inches long. On its face, you can see a doorway framed by raised borders and crossed by a pattern of horizontal bars. It's made from a fine, hard limestone that must have taken skill and time to carve. Garfinkel and researcher Madeleine Mumkwoglu studied it in detail and suggested that its design mirrors features used in the architecture of important public or royal buildings from the same era. Another of the sacred rooms revealed a heavy basalt altar. Basalt is a dark, dense volcanic rock, not something you casually shape with a hand tool. The altar had a flat top, ideal for pouring liquids or burning small offerings. Nearby were smaller ritual items, a 2-cup vessel that could be used for libations, and a small seal. An Egyptian scarab also came from one of these rooms. Scarabs often served as amulets or symbols of rebirth, and their presence in ritual contexts across the region was common. Together, these finds show that the people of Kayafa followed patterns of worship that shared threads with neighboring cultures while still keeping their own distinct style. One detail stood out immediately. In all of these ritual rooms, the archaeologists did not find small clay figurines of gods or goddesses, the kind that appear frequently at other Iron Age sites. That doesn't prove what the people believed, but it does tell us something about their practice. The objects they left behind, standing stones, altars, architectural models, suggest a focus on places and symbols rather than carved human or animal shapes. With the writing, dating, and rituals in place, one question remained: why here? The strategic secret behind the city's location. From the ridge, it's easy to see why Khirbet Kayafa mattered. Its hill commands the valley of Elah below, the main route between the plains and the highlands. In the ancient world, that meant connection. To the west lay Philistia, the land of the Philistines. To the east, the uplands of Judah. Between them ran this natural highway, a path that armies, traders, and travelers had followed for centuries. Whoever held the ridge at its northern edge could watch the flow in both directions. It was more than a scenic hilltop. It was a choke point, a guard post between two worlds. That's the role the site seems to have been built for, and it's exactly how Yosef Garfinkel describes its purpose. From the top, the landscape spreads out in all directions. To the west, barely over a mile away, stands the ancient mound of Azekah. To the southeast, only about a mile and a half, is Soko. Both lie within sight, close enough that you could walk from one to the other in less than an hour. A little farther west, about 7.5 miles away, is Tel Safi, the ancient city of Gath, one of the great Philistine strongholds. In the early Iron Age, Gath dominated the lowlands. If a fortified town like Caiapha stood guard at the edge of the Elah Valley, it wasn't for the view, it was for strategy. The valley carried movement from Gath straight toward the highlands, and a watch point here could track that traffic and send warning eastward. Everything about Caiapha's design fits that valley guard job. Its defining feature is its two massive gates. The western gate faces toward Azekah and the lowlands, the route to the Philistine plain. The southern gate faces the floor of the Elah Valley itself, the path that climbs eastward. Because the small city had two gates, the excavators suggested linking it to the biblical town of Sha'arayim, a Hebrew name that literally means two gates. Still, as Garfinkel always notes, it's a proposal, not a certainty. Not everyone agrees, and that's fine. What matters here is that the twin-gate plan defines how the city functioned. To understand that function, you can picture the Shepelah, the low-rolling hills between the coastal plain and the highlands, as a belt of passes. Each pass opens a route between the two regions, and the Elah Valley is one of the most important. In straight-line distance, Caiapha lies about 18.5 miles southwest of Jerusalem. In ancient travel terms, that's about a full day's walk. It was close enough for a signal to reach the capital quickly, but far enough out to serve as a first line of defense. If you were responsible for keeping the highlands safe from sudden attacks coming from the west, this is where you would want an early warning post. The city's design supports that interpretation. Across Judah in the early Iron Age, several towns followed a similar blueprint. A double wall with narrow rooms built between the two lines of stone. Houses were built right against it, forming a continuous belt of homes that also strengthened the defenses. An inner road ran around the inside of the city, allowing guards or messengers to move quickly between gates without cutting through crowded alleys. Towns like Beth Shemesh and Tel Nazbe, both within a day's walk of Jerusalem, use the same basic system. Garfinkel's team compared Caiapha's plan with other contemporary levels in the Shepelah and found some striking parallels. One of the best examples comes from level 5 at Lachish, where excavations revealed a fortified town built in the 10th century BCE. There too, a line of houses hugged the inside of the city wall. The resemblance to Caiapha is unmistakable. That frontier need becomes even clearer when you look west to Gath. At its height, Gath covered more than 70 acres, making it one of the largest cities in the region. From Caiapha's ridge, Gath is less than 8 miles away in a straight line. A major lowland power that close to Judah's border explains why the highlands would respond by planting fortified towns like Caiapha across the valleys. Each one could hold a small garrison, store supplies, and send signals. When the digging at Khirbet Caiapha finally ended, a new kind of work began. The untold story. After the excavation ended, turning thousands of stones and soil layers into a permanent, verifiable record took years. Yosef Garfinkel and his team set out to make sure the story of this small city would survive long after the trenches closed. That meant organized cataloging, expert studies, and large printed volumes that fixed every detail in black and white. The reports came out as a structured series. The first major book laid the foundation for everything that followed. It described how the excavations were run, how the trenches were numbered, and how each type of find, pottery, bones, metals, or tools, would be logged. Specialists from the Hebrew University and the Israel Antiquities Authority contributed sections, creating a single method for the rest of the seasons to follow. That first volume became the model for how Caiapha's story would be told. Later books expanded the record. One large installment, edited by Garfinkel with Sar Ganner and Michael Hazel, pulled together the main layout of the site, the walls, gates, and building plans from 4 different excavation areas. It documented the layers of soil, the rooms, and the points where one phase of construction gave way to another. Another volume focused entirely on art, cult objects, and inscriptions found at Caiapha. Instead of scattering these delicate pieces across unrelated journals, the team grouped them together, photographed them carefully, and published them at a consistent scale. Altars, amulets, seals, and carved models appear side by side, each described in the same format. Anyone comparing symbols or styles across the region now has a single, reliable reference. Pottery, always the backbone of archaeological dating, received its own treatment. Working with Hugu Kang, Garfinkel organized a typology of Iron Age ceramics from the site, showing rim shapes, handles, surface textures, and how each vessel type was used. Those drawings and measurements are what allow later excavations elsewhere in Israel to line up their dates. When a pot from another dig matches a Caiapha form, it anchors that layer to the same period. The most delicate object, the inked pottery sherd known as the ostrakon, went through years of imaging and study. The Israel Antiquities Authority first photographed it in color, black and white, and infrared to catch faint traces of writing. Later, the fragment was examined under 12 different light bands, a method called multispectral imaging. Each wavelength revealed slightly different details of the ink, allowing technicians to separate genuine strokes from cracks or stains. Metal finds were treated in the same order. A separate study cataloged every item, tools, fittings, pins, and blades, along with the exact room or floor where it appeared. The information was then matched to the architectural plans so researchers could trace patterns. Which alloys turned up in homes, which were near storage spaces, and which were near the gates. Some of Kayafa's discoveries left the lab and entered public display. The inked ostrakhan took its place in the Iron Age Gallery of the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, where visitors could see the faint lines up close. A carved stone model of a building facade, the miniature shrine found near one of the gates, has traveled in international exhibitions, representing the artistic skill behind the city's construction. The site itself gained formal protection soon after the main excavations ended. In 2014, Israel's Parks Authority and the government declared the hill and the surrounding valley of Elah a national park, halting plans for a nearby residential project. With park status came routine maintenance, paths marked, weeds cleared, and erosion controlled so that heavy winter rain would not eat into the exposed walls. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.